This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 283, Tugboat. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we have the pleasure of talking with Tugboat CEO Matt Westgate. Yes, you heard it, the Matt Westgate. CEO Tugboat, co-founder of Lullabot, and early Drupal contributor. Last year, Matt stepped up to help the Drupal Association during their financial crisis and talked with us about it on episode 245 for the Drupal Cares campaign. He's based in New England, and he has supported our efforts to grow the community locally, and we appreciate it. Joining us this week again, as usual, I suppose, is Brian Perry. What's new with you this week?
Yeah, work-wise, we've been slowly introducing Gatsby onto the Bounteous site. So we launched some new content there, but probably more importantly, I've been playing a new Mario game, the Bowser's Fury portion of Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. And it's good. I like it. It's a 3D Mario game. It's pretty short. And it's interesting in that it's just one big open world and you go to different sections that nothing is really all that much gated off. So it's cool. It almost feels like a little experiment or maybe something they decided to push out quickly due to like COVID development woes, but it's fun.
You drop a link to that in the show notes because I got my son a Switch for Christmas and we're always looking for new stuff to try.
Definitely. Yeah. And the 3D World game I had already played, but that's actually a great game for kids too.
Very cool.
So Stephen, what is going on with you these days?
So I was on a Slack message with my team this week. And we were talking about things all the developers were doing this week. And someone messaged, hey, I'm attending. I can't go to this meeting that we had scheduled because I'm attending a training session about config split with John Picozzi.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So and that's how I felt. It was very
you
exciting.
Shut that down, right? Yeah,
it's exciting to see someone on my dev team I don't know how they knew about it. But they had registered for John's presentation with GovCon. I think it was on Thursday for a couple of hours where he went through like a how to use config split thing. And it was super fun to see like our local like Talking Drupal team like reach out to the universe or get connected with the universe that I'm in. So John, how did that go, by the way?
It went great. So
Yeah.
This was the folks at GovCon are always awesome, and they actually invited me back to do this again. So I had done it for GovCon last year sometime. I don't remember exactly when it was. And that was, kind of live training sort of thing as well. And they, that was actually a half day training and they didn't record it. And the organizers were like, oh, we should have recorded that. Can you come do it again for our webinar series, which we will record? And I said, yeah, sure. I'll come back and do it as many times as you want me to, as many times as people want to listen. So yeah, it went really well. Everybody seemed to get something out of it, which was good. There were some awesome questions asked, which was awesome. And yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, I jumped in knowing that someone on my team was on this call. I jumped in for a few minutes, clicked the link she shared with me, and you had a great attendance to this thing too as well, which was fun to see.
Yeah, I guess there were about 100 signups, and I think towards the high side there were 30 to 50-ish people there, maybe.
When I connected in, it was 65. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so clearly I missed a bunch of people as they were in there. So
yeah.
That's good. I like that.
Hey, the last thing I want to mention is over the past 6 years, or however long we've been doing this podcast, Lullabot has been very supportive of the podcast and things we do locally in New England. And I just want to mention that as the person who like organizes most of the content for this show, I reach out to CEOs, reach out to thought leaders, reach out to lots of people in the Drupal community for guest hosts. There's one person that jumps out to me as the person that when I email him, within 12 hours, I get a response back. That's Matt. And Matt, I just want to thank you for, and I know you don't just do this for me. I'm not anything special, nor is Talking Drupal. I expect you to do this with everyone in the Drupal community. And I want to thank you for your responsiveness, for reaching out and responding to people when they reach out to you, because I imagine you get quite a bit of that. So thank you. And let's move on to John. What's new with you?
Yeah. So this was apparently old news, as I found out when I mentioned it in our Slack channel. But in episode 255, which was July of last year, Stephen mentioned using Mailhog. And over the weekend, I was doing a project with content moderation, and I wanted to send out emails based on somebody editing a piece of content and a reviewer needing to review it. And I was like, I don't want to how do I send emails out of Lando? What's the easiest way to do that? And so I typed that into the old Google machine, and a post let me rephrase that. Mailhog came up, documentation on the Lando site with Mailhog came up, and I was like, oh, interesting. Now, I was doing this and I had no recollection of Stephen and Nick and I talking about it. I know, terrible. Got this thing installed, used a post from, used the Lando docs, used a post from Mike Anello, who we had on a show last week or the week before maybe. And, his post, super helpful. Got this thing set up, got this thing running. It worked great. Was catching all of my emails, was showing me like, hey, you sent an email. It works really good. And then I dropped it into the Talking Drupal channel. Like, hey guys, I just used this great thing. I'm going to talk about it. And they were like, hey, doofus, we talked about that back in July. And I was like, oh, but what we didn't do in July in the show notes was add links to the helpful content. So we are going to do that here today. So I got a link to the Mailhog library, Mike Anello's post, and the Lando documentation. So using Lando, need email, check out Mailhog. It's super great. Nick, what is going on with you?
Not too much this week. Last week was pretty busy for me. Luckily, I was safe and warm and had power, but a lot of my clients are based in Texas and Oregon. And, I thought it was kind of a joke when my clients in Oregon and Texas both told me they had no power. And then I kind of checked the news and realized that most of the rest of the country was having some trouble. So last week was really busy for me. I had to, step up some support for some clients that, the entire team just didn't have power and water for almost a week last week. So if you know anybody in Texas, reach out to them, make sure they're okay, see if there's any way you can help. It was definitely a rough week last week. I'm sure everybody on this call knows people out west, but yeah, it was pretty quiet for me, except for, getting additional support calls that I usually don't have. It was interesting. The interesting thing to me is seeing like the side of support for some of my clients that I never interact with. They basically just forwarded everything to me. And it's like just seeing people from the company that I've never interacted with, the reason behind it wasn't great, but it was nice to interact with different parts of the, people from the companies that I work with. And as I introduced earlier, we also have Matt Westgate with us. What's new with you this week?
Hey, friends. Great to be here. Y'all had exciting weeks. I appreciate the kind words. Stephen, I'm always happy to be on. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't enjoying it myself. So the feeling is mutual. Like Nick said, last week was kind of crazy. It was Lullabots and Tugboat are both distributed companies. So all of our employees are everywhere. And we had several employees in Texas and Oregon who were without power as well. So I spent a fair amount of the week just worrying and making sure they were okay and doing what I could to support them. It was hard to support them because there's like no infrastructure in Texas, right? So even if you wanted to arrange for groceries, like there wasn't food in the grocery stores, or you wanted to, send a gift card, or like just that stuff wasn't working. So the best you could do is just check in. But we made it through. And this weekend, I spent time dismantling my Wi-Fi network and putting up a new one, which was a lot of fun. So I went down a pretty deep rabbit hole. I had some old Google pucks from, I don't know, 2015 maybe, that I had there, and they didn't, they didn't have the fast like Wi-Fi 6 or nearly anything like that. And so I spent a bunch of time researching that, and I made sort of an odd choice, but a choice that I'm really happy with. I think all the cool kids, which I'm not a part of that cat, but all the cool kids are using like the Ubiquity stuff these days. And I looked at it and I just wasn't feeling like that was my jam for various reasons. So I ended up going with Aruba Networks,
that's high upscale.
Yeah,
it's the big voice.
And I love it. So they actually made a more consumer line version called Instant On to compete in that mid-market sector. And so I spent a lot of time learning things that I probably didn't even need to learn, RSTP and all sorts of things. But it was a lot of fun. And so now it's up and running. So knock on wood that I don't have to.
So it wasn't a consumer. It's not a consumer product.
No, it is. They're known for.
Okay.
They're known for being the high end things. Like grade. They have certain, like you can't really go get it on Amazon. You have to go through like Newegg or B&H or one of those kinds of sites. But it's HP, Hewlett Packard, and they have what's called their Instant Online, which is sort of a more simpler version of their access points. And so I got a switch and a couple access points, and then did a Ethernet backhaul to form my Wi-Fi connection around the house. And
have you seen the difference?
Great. Yeah. Oh my God.
Huge, right?
Yeah, huge.
So you went from non-mesh network to a mesh network, right?
Yeah, more or less, from a wireless mesh to a wired mesh, but it wasn't a fast connection. So now the access points are all sequential with an Ethernet cable between them.
Oh, really?
And like, I can do Zoom again. But mostly it's because my wife, who her family is in Spain, she was trying to do like WhatsApp, like video messages and stuff, and always cutting out, and like I had to fix that.
So you are the hero. You're the new hero in the house, right?
For now, as long as it's still up and running.
Right.
Yeah.
You probably made the right choice too, because Ubiquity, I mean, I was a huge fan of theirs, but maybe a year ago they started introducing like tracking stuff, like without just like silently introducing tracking without telling people, without giving an easy way to shut it off, non-opt-in. They just had a breach on one of their third-party accounts too. So
I have Eero, and it's the same thing under the Amazon umbrella. So I'm trading quite a bit for my Wi-Fi convenience.
I think I think Steven and I both have Eeros, and
it's great. But
I have just like TP-Link, I think. But I looked at Aruba, but when I was looking, they didn't have Instant On, I don't think, maybe I didn't find it. I just found all the enterprise grid, and I was like, I can't afford that. There's four zeros on the end of like the price tag for what I was looking at, and I'm like, this is
I tell you, Nick,
into like Harvard and stuff.
I ran the numbers, and it ended up being cheaper than the Ubiquity hardware. So maybe this new, it's like Aruba Instant On is what it's called, and they're just sort of like, they're sort of the same, what's it called? The same form factor as the other ones, but it's more of a simpler version. But I don't see the reason I didn't do the Ubiquity isn't so much the tracking stuff. It was sort of like I was getting these reports of like, in the old days, you could just send like a JSON config file and interact with the command line. And like, it seemed like there was sort of a shift away from that in their new consumer markets, and they also didn't have like the Wi-Fi 6 stuff ready to go.
Okay.
So it was sort of that, and like the software kind of always being in beta. I was like, I don't need that. Like, I just need something stable that works, that I can be a little bit of a geek around when I need to, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that's really competitive. Yeah, I'll have to look at this I might be redoing my network in the next months.
Well, now that we've confirmed that all of our networking is in good shape, we can move on to our week's story. And this time we're going to be talking about DrupalCon, which is coming up. It is DrupalCon North America is online again this year, unsurprisingly, April 12th through 16th. And I don't know if folks on today, they recently had they completed their call for content. So did anybody submit session submissions? I did a couple, and the process was a little bit different, or at least what they were encouraging people to submit was a little bit different this year, which I thought was kind of interesting.
What do you mean by that, Brian?
They seem to be, well, at least in kind of what they outlined, they were encouraging people to do like non-lecture formats. So you could still do like a regular talk where you get up and talk to slides. But they really stressed that they set up the schedule in such a way that they had more room for, and were encouraging things that weren't that. So things like workshops, and they also had another format that was really interesting that was intended to be asynchronous. So you would share content ahead of time that people could do on their own time. And then the quote unquote session was, I think, just a half-hour block where people could ask questions. There could be open discussion. And I thought all that stuff was pretty cool.
That's it. That is really interesting.
And what were the time slots like?
It varied based on the type of content, I believe, but I think typically around like half an hour or 45 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if that actually resulted in a lot of people, opting into that format, and if it kind of changes the structure of DrupalCon. And they said they're specifically trying to combat the Zoom fatigue that we're all feeling.
Sure. Yeah. What's going to be really
which makes
interesting is going to be like the display of that on the schedule and communicating effectively what type of session or format it is in, because I can imagine a lot of people going into something, and if it's one of those asynchronous sorts of things, being like, well, what is this? I don't understand. Like, I can't.
Yeah. I was hesitant to pull the trigger on that type of format. I ended up submitting one of my concepts as a workshop, just because I felt a little bit more comfortable, like, we'll all do this together.
So sessions have not been selected yet, I don't think. I think we got a few more weeks for that.
No, that's right.
Are you guys planning to attend? I think currently you could register for, after early bird is $250 to register for the conference. Have you guys done that?
I haven't yet, but I might.
I haven't yet either.
I'm not going to lie, Nick. I'm not holding my breath, man. I mean, if you show up awesome, but I think every year since we've been doing this show, it's been like, yeah, maybe I'll go. And then.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be in Boston, right? Real time.
Yeah, such a bummer.
If it was in Boston, I would have been there. It would have been my first actual DrupalCon.
It would have been like the first time. Anyway, I look forward to DrupalCon. I think they're doing the same sort of technology platform they did last year, which I think worked really well. So I look forward to that. Moving into our primary topic, Matt, leading off with the hard questions here. What's the elevator pitch for Tugboat?
The elevator pitch for Tugboat. On all those projects where you had that one staging environment that everybody fought for in your development workflow, we're trying to bring that whole infrastructure on demand to that process, so you can have as many staging environments as you need in clean, isolated environments that spin up and do all the work for you as soon as you push the code. So the idea is harmonious feedback loops, right? Like, you push your code, you have another automated process, Tugboat in this case, that just builds out that environment drops a URL on the ticket, and everybody can see it. And you can get immediate feedback that way. So what we found is, that whole way of thinking used to come from having to buy or rent physical servers, right? Like the reason you had 3 environments, dev, stage, and prod, is because you needed to go buy those machines, have them sit there, turn them on, and then wait for requests to happen. And so that whole way of working can be reinvented. And so a tool like Tugboat, it's just infrastructure on demand. In this case, it's specifically ephemeral infrastructure on demand. And the idea is that whole, like we always said, like the thing about Tugboat is it makes development work visual. Like it's not just designers that get to have visual work, developers get it too. And if everybody can see what's being worked on, they don't need to have a local environment themselves. Everybody can see. I mean, imagine doing code reviews, right? Like there's no configuration drift or configuration file update. You've just got an environment that spins up. You send your peer the URL, they can see it. Imagine sprint demos, right? At the end of your, let's say, 2-week sprint cycle. That's more just signing off on the fully integrated environment because everybody's seen everything along the way. It's all been built already. And I love the human connection that Tugboat provides. Being able to see and talk about the work together as it's happening. I love it. That wasn't an elevator pitch, but
it's a long elevator
I
ride.
don't know.
It's fine.
I'm sold, and we're on like the 12th floor, so it's all good.
So Matt, many of the things that you've just mentioned are things that I desired as a developer for a long time. And I imagine this was like for Lullabot was scratching an itch kind of thing. So maybe you could describe how Tugboat came about.
Yeah, sure. So Lullabot, Drupal digital agency, started in 2006. I'm one of the co-founders. Now it's a 100% employee-owned company, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. That happened 4 weeks ago. But now it's all employee-owned, which is really freaking cool. Tugboat is wholly owned by Lullabot. So Tugboat is also an employee-owned company now as well. But it was back in 2012 when Tugboat started. It was just a bunch of bash scripts that became drush scripts that became Docker and Docker Swarm and all of that. But it was, we had the proverbial problem that all agencies have, which is like just trying to find like low friction ways to interact with and empower our stakeholders on the projects. Oftentimes they're busy people and our project isn't the only project that they're worried about, right? Like we're just one of the 10 initiatives that have to be done in this quarter. So, how do you empower them to like review things quickly, give feedback, keep moving on, especially when it's like, sometimes they don't know, and sometimes they want to see like different versions of things. And like, there's a thing of like being able to meet people where the work is going to happen, like being able to meet people in the browser, in the fully working website, so they can actually get the entire experience. We can do those things now. And so we were having a client that they were always on the go. They had technical proficiency, but they just never were like at their laptop long enough to get their local environment going, And so James Sansbury wrote this thing. We just called it a pull request builder at the time. But he wrote this thing so that when he would do a code push, it would build out an environment on demand for his stakeholder. And once that happened, it just took off internally in our organization, and we've just been kept building it out ever since.
So you have a pretty wide range of pricing from free to $4.99 a month. Can you tell us a little bit about what each plan is good for? Because it sounds like it's good for smaller teams or more enterprise type situations.
Yeah. So it's free all the way up to $499, not $4.99. Just to clarify, we've got the $1.99. No, so the pricing. So Tugboat's two things, right? So I have an exciting announcement about Tugboat as well. I don't want to forget that one. Tugboat is pull request builder, but then it does a little bit more than that too. So once it doesn't have to just be pull requests, it can be branches, tags, code commit. But the other thing that it does is it runs these tests for you after it's doing the builds. So we're trying to add value that way too. So one of the things that it does is visual regression testing. So it works with your Git repository, right? So you tell it which branch is the production branch, whether that's the main branch or another, use a different workflow. You say, this is my main branch. And so then Tugboat will take a snapshot of that. We call it a base preview, but it takes a snapshot of like when you get production up and running, it takes a snapshot of that branch. And then when you do work, whether it's a feature-based workflow or whatever you have, when you make a new branch, Tugboat builds from that snapshot as its starting place. All right,
Matt, what technology is being used for that? Or libraries?
It's JavaScript, Docker Swarm.
Okay.
But what's happening here? Those snapshots is some underlying disk technology. I don't know. Okay. I don't know what it is.
Right. So can you modify, like what I'm thinking of, I have some clients that they have to be HIPAA compliant. And so certain data just can't be exported from the production environment. So when you're creating that snapshot, can you manipulate the data that gets stored there so you can remain HIPAA compliant? Because or is Tugboat itself HIPAA compliant and will sign a BLA?
Yeah, so so the snapshot thing, all I'm trying to say there is it takes a snapshot of the environment once it's up and running. So once your PHP containers are going, your MySQL containers are going, if you're doing a Drupal thing, the data that's put out there, you can run your sanitization scripts that you would before or after. For some people that that want all the data or need all the data to stay behind their firewall, we have an on-prem version of Tugboat. It basically runs inside. It's like Docker within Docker, but you just do an install of Tugboat on your own hardware, and then you can keep it in your firewall or behind your firewall that way. So that's a more expensive option. But we do that for a lot of our clients. Where I was going though, so the whole thing about the snapshot is it's really fast to build on Tugboat, and time is always money, right? Waiting for build times. So if your production website is a 50 gig database and you make a new branch to work on a new feature and push that up, but you've barely touched the database, you don't have to wait for all those 50 gigs to load again. It's going to inherit that from the snapshot, and that build's going to take minutes rather than hours. And that is probably like the key differentiator is this is ephemeral infrastructure built for speed. And it's, as we say in New England, it's wicked fast. The other thing about the snapshots is disk space. If your production environment is 2 gigs, soup to nuts from all of your containers and everything, and you make a derivative branch, that derivative branch may only be like 100 megs or so. And the reason that I bring that up is because of pricing. Pricing is based on the amount of disk usage. So if you're using snapshots, you can do a lot more within the pricing tiers than not. The free plan, I can't remember how much disk space it is. I want to say like 10 gigs, something like that, on our free plan. But that should let you build at least 2 or 3 simultaneous, we call them preview environments, right? So if you have 2 or 3 open pull requests at a time, that's probably gonna work for you. The difference in the pricing tiers is the amount of memory available the amount of CPU available, and then all of those other automated tests. That's sort of our roadmap. So one of the paid tiers comes with the visual regression. So it compares your branch versus what's in production, what's in that production branch, right? Takes a snapshot of it. The cool thing is you can send the URLs to test. You pass that in your config file. So you just give it, pass the URLs, but you can also set a threshold, which is awesome. So you can do things like, for instance, if the contact page changes more than 10% from what's in this branch for the mobile view, then don't pass this build, fail it, because it needs to be manually approved. And so it'll go over and set the GitHub status.
Are you using an existing tool for that, something like Backstop, or did you build something custom for it?
That's what I was asking earlier.
I got your back, man.
Oh, okay. I didn't connect.
All right, yeah.
No, we built our own because it needed to use the whole base preview thing. It's not it's not incredibly robust, right? Like you can't script the visual regression to do the fancy things. There's other better tools for that, but we needed. So here's the thing about like, these are feature branches. This is often the workflow, right? Feature-based workflow. You need fast tests. Like this is just sort of the real quick check-in. This isn't like send it over to QA for the full analysis report. You just need some guardrails along the way. And that's what we're trying to offer, some really quick scans. So the visual regression, that's like real quick, like raising your hand, like something is really wrong with this page. Like, look at this. The other one that we did is we did Lighthouse integration. So that's another tier, right? But now you're bringing in accessibility audits, SEO audits, performance, progressive web apps. So yeah, you can run this stuff on your own, but why not send it to the robot to run so you can go and do your own things, right? So what we're working on now soon is the ability to set thresholds for that. So like if accessibility drops by 25% based on what's in prod, flag this for me. Like just give me the quick scans. I don't need to look at every single build, but just tell me the ones that like really go bad fast. And so the difference in pricing tiers is the disk space and those features that are available. Like we've got some other ones that we're gonna keep chipping away at these automated tests to help agencies that otherwise they run. There's the one person in their org that always does the security scan. There's the one person that always does that. And so the more that we can empower agencies to respond to RFPs and say, yeah, we do all of these tests for every code push, that's where we're trying to go.
And where do you host Tugboat? Like, where do you live?
Yeah, that's a great question. We host with Linode, and they're awesome. Can't say enough good things about them. And there was very specific reasons for doing that. All the container-based orchestration and stuff that we're doing, when you're trying to do it on like a pay-as-you-go service, it adds up pretty quickly to keep those containers running. So we needed a pricing model that was consistent and stable. That really worked for us. And so Linode, it was kind of a no-brainer when we were doing the cost analysis, and they've been great to work with. Can't say enough good things about them.
Cool. One thing that came up on a previous episode of this podcast, 279, because I've memorized all of the episode numbers, even though I'm a guest.
Tell me about episode 36.
Not a very good one. I would skip it. I'd skip that one. But Adam Bergstein was on talking about Simply Test Me, and it came up that Tugboat is now the technology behind Simply Test Me. I know that changed maybe like a year ago, but curious about how that came about and if there are any other services where Tugboat is the secret sauce behind the scenes.
The secret sauce. I love it. Yeah, no, that's great, Brian. Yeah, Adam, God bless him. He's done so much for the community. Really appreciate his continued efforts. And he's got someone else helping him now. I can't remember his name. I want to give a shout out for him. Matt. Yeah.
Matt Lemon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, big shout out to those two. So Adam offers simplytest.me is a site. You can go there and it'll build up environments, Drupal environments based on patches or modules integrated, things like that. And Adam's run that, pro bono for a number of years. And there was a lot of infrastructure to maintain. And he started getting into some performance issues, things like that. And we approached him, and we didn't even know if it would be a viable idea. But the more we talk, the more that we realize that this is basically an ephemeral infrastructure issue. You need to spin something up, and you need to spin it down. And Lullabot being Lullabot, of course, we over-engineered Tugboat. That's what we do, and I mean that in the best way possible. Because I'm mind blown by that stuff. I love great engineering through and through. But Tugboat started as an API-based application. So even today, the website does 70% of what you can accomplish from the command line interface to Tugboat. And so we exposed the API to Adam and Simply Test Me. It's available to anybody. And he built the infrastructure. He wrote a Drupal module that interacts with the Tugboat API that handles all the orchestration for that. That's kind of how it came about. And it's been great. Awesome. I was genuinely surprised at how well it's worked and been working. And we do that for a couple of other places. Our friends over at Backdrop CMS, they use the API to build on-demand previews for demoing Backdrop. You can go there and click a preview. The other one that we did a couple of weeks ago is Drupal.org is now building out all. Yeah, you've heard of that one. It's building out all of the previews for core issues over there. We're trying to get more people jumping into the community, less developer oriented jumping in and contributing, which we need, UI, accessibility, QA, all of that. And so not needing a local, just clicking the environment and seeing that. And the announcement, this is a great time to do it, is within a few weeks, hopefully, Tugboat's going to be available for all of Contrib. And really? So
heard it here first, folks.
Wow.
That is awesome. Wow. And big shout out to Tim and Neil over at the Drupal Association for their efforts, and Wampy in particular. He is the one that wrote nearly all the code to make that happen. But the idea right now, the working concept, and I'll give you the link to the issue queue because it's out there in the open. But the idea is a contrib maintainer can put a Tugboat file in their repository, and it'll integrate with Drupal.org and then build out the previews right on Drupal.org for your issue queues.
That's so cool. The workflow changes that have happened in the Drupal community over the past year are insane. It's wonderful.
Yeah. For the better, right?
Yeah. Not bad insane, good insane.
Shameless plug. If you're listening to this before Thursday, Tim will actually be joining the Providence Drupal meetup to walk through the new merge request workflow on Drupal.org. So we'll drop a link to that in the show notes. Also, we had our fact checkers go back to episode 36, and that was PCI compliance with Rick Manelius for anybody that was interested. So,
sorry, Rick, didn't mean to throw the shade there.
I think Rick's going to need to get invited back for a vindication episode.
We'll put Brian's home address in the show notes as well if anybody wants to send him. Back on topic though. So Tugboat to me sounds pretty unique. Question here is, are there competitors out there? Are there products that kind of do the same thing? And if so, how is Tugboat different?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think where you tend to see a lot of this is in the static site generators, right? Like your Netlifys of the world, that sort of thing. It's really easy to build out deployment previews for those kinds of platforms. I think it gets a little more complicated, or a lot more complicated for big dynamic data-driven websites like Drupal, Adobe Experience Manager, those kinds of platforms. There's an element of hosting companies, like your Pantheons, for instance, with the multi-dev environments, or your platform SHs of the world that offer similar things, that do similar things that Tugboat does. And yet it's also different too, right? Each one has its pros and cons. Like multi-dev is good in certain environments. My shameless plug is that Tugboat is the fastest platform for doing it, like hands down. We've designed it that way for speed. But we have many, many customers who will use the build artifacts from Tugboat once they've got it, because Pantheon imposes a very specific workflow, a very best practices driven workflow that works for many, but not all. Sometimes people push the Git repository outside of Pantheon because they want to bring other integrations in and stuff like that. And as soon as you make that jump, there's other possibilities that become available for you. So we have scripts on our website of how to integrate with Pantheon, and they're great people, great product. And you can take the build artifacts from Tugboat, push it up to multi-dev as that last mile check, of on the actual infrastructure, and then go live. And we see that workflow a lot of times. So, competitors, it depends on how you look at it and what your workflow is, I think. But we're very, very friendly with the Drupal hosting companies, your Acquias, your Pantheons, and so on.
So how does Tugboat compare to somebody kind of like doing more of a rolled your own solution with like Bitbucket pipelines or GitHub Actions?
Yeah. So I'd say you can use Tugboat along with any of those triggers, pipelines or actions, and certainly we have clients that do that. I think the whole thing is, as an agency, the way that we look at things is, do we want to spend our own resources maintaining this stuff ourselves, or is this something that we can have a service for that then we can start bringing our people back to billable work? And that's a pretty straightforward cost benefit analysis, right? Like, here's what I would make, here's the revenue that would be generated that are billable, here's the cost savings that we're getting doing this, like, let's run the numbers.
It's super compelling though, right? To say like, hey, here's a service that will test your website, show you a preview, do all of these cool things, and all you have to do is pay this monthly fee, as opposed to like, hey, let's build these actions or these pipelines ourselves and like have to port them from project to project, so on and so forth.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, there's another aspect there of like, it's hard to do training in an agency if you have one person that maintains this part of the infrastructure and nobody else really knows how to do it. That becomes a bottleneck. Also, if you have, like, I don't know about you all, but like when we get new clients, when Lullabot gets new clients, they don't always provide the infrastructure, right? So like it's left up to you to provide the ephemeral infrastructure to do your work in. Sometimes they might use Pantheon, sometimes they might use Acquia, but even that can be kind of an issue, right? Because now you need a team that understands that specific hosting vendor. And so we see a pattern of agencies wanting to be more responsible and take ownership of their DevOps practice and become hosting agnostic. From like a training and scaling perspective, they want their processes that then when they're ready to deploy, they just go out to and push to the hosting provider.
So last part of this question. I know this question's been like multi-part, but we've talked about a couple of different hosting providers, and I'm wondering, are there any plans for Tugboat in the future to possibly partner with hosting providers similar to like, you know, how New Relic partners with certain hosting providers?
Yeah, and we want to have those conversations. So hosting companies, if you're listening and we haven't contacted you yet, please reach out to us. We're having an active conversation right now that we should see hopefully some announcements coming pretty soon. Is Tugboat's going to begin offering a FedRAMP compliant version of Tugboat. So that's a big area that we see as an opportunity for, especially there was sort of this pivot that happened when we started doing the accessibility audit route that opened up a pathway for more government agencies, for instance. And so we're working on a relationship with a hosting provider to offer a FedRAMP compliant version of Tugboat, and really excited about that offering.
So Matt, I'm going to jump in here. You know, I have some special connection to that environment. So, how soon do you see this happening, and how will that take place in terms of the FedRAMP? So for listeners who don't know, FedRAMP means that it's a certified cloud service for the federal government. And as our listeners know, I work with the federal government, so I'm interested to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. This is all pending, but the idea is that the hosting provider provides the infrastructure that has been FedRAMP secured. We have, for the last few months, gone through security audits, scans, made changes to our software to be compliant, and they will essentially, the hosting provider will have an on-premise license to Tugboat to run in their secure environment. Because of the nature of FedRAMP, we won't have direct access to the customer, but we will be there for, I don't remember how the tiers work. When the super important things like tier 3, tier 1, I don't know, like where our customer support level is, the hosting provider will reach out to us for like, hey, we need your advice on what to do here. But that's sort of the model that we're working under now. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm really excited to hear your second super announcement today of who that hosting provider is. That's a joke.
I'm sorry, I can't. The line broke up. I didn't catch that last question.
All right.
You're obviously pretty closely aligned with the open source community. You know, you've been involved with Drupal for quite some time. And I'm curious if anything, you know, what kind of open source technologies other than Docker that you've mentioned are you using with Tugboat? And will you be open sourcing anything related to Tugboat at any point?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. There's always that tension between wanting to open source all things and like trying to find business models around that and that support that endeavor. We've open sourced a few things around Tugboat. Nothing that's like the big aspect of it, but certain scripts and stuff that we've run. And the first versions of Tugboat back in the day were open source. Right now, we don't have immediate plans to open source Tugboat. It's something that we've talked about and thought about internally. But we think for right now that there's value in our approach and not being open source right now. But it's a conversation that we have a lot. What it would do is it would sort of bring a different business model in, and right now that would upend we have to think about a different approach. Sustainability is important, but I remember back in 2016, like one of our end goals was to be in a world where Tugboat was open source. And so it's not an immediate part of the roadmap, but we do have a pathway to go there should success continue to happen. It's about as good as I can do on that one right now.
Fair enough.
I'd be interested in hearing how Lullabot uses Tugboat internally? Is it, I know, for example, that it was used on the Olivero efforts, although that was more of a community project, but that was really helpful. But yeah, does Lullabot use it on every project, and, you know, has dog fooding it in that way, has it helped the project grow in any interesting ways?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's helped immensely. You know, the other thing that helps is we have an awesome community. We have a Slack community. There, we put an announcement on the Tugboat blog. Tugboat.qa is the website, but we put an announcement there. We've got a community of maybe, I think it's like 250 people just that love DevOps and, you know, infrastructure as code and all of that sort of stuff. And so we chat with them regularly for feedback. You know, we sometimes we release new features for them to try out and just try to help each other with our build scripts, you know, our YAML files and all of that. But certainly like Tugboat wouldn't have been possible without the feedback in the early days from the Lullabot team. And I can't say definitively that we use it for every project, but almost every project uses Tugboat. And there's sort of two ways that it happens. Oftentimes, you know, well, one way it happens is in our support and maintenance department. Like if you become a support client in Lullabot, you automatically use Tugboat because that is just the best way to communicate. So, you know, Lullabot has a single license for Tugboat in that environment for our support and maintenance department, and then all of the clients are in that tier. And then for the client services side, they have a single invoice with many projects on it. And those sizes, the prices depend on the size of the client. But where it's helped them is projects don't always start with infrastructure. And sometimes you just need infrastructure in order to get started. So they use that. But I think very much the workflow is always try to bring Tugboat into the equation because it's the communication feedback loop, you know. It saves so much time and headache and wondering what's going on.
That's great.
So you mentioned a little earlier in the show that Lullabot's now a wholly employee-owned company, and Tugboat is a wholly owned subsidiary company, if I said that right. I'm a little curious if you could talk about, you stepped down as the CEO of Lullabot, became the CEO of Tugboat. You know, can you tell us a little bit about that process, sure, or why that's important?
I mean, Nick, it's a dream come true, man. Like it's I've been wanting this for a long time, since 2012, and it's been very intentional, and I didn't think we would get there until 2026. So we're early and it's awesome. But you know, the thing about services work, knowledge work is like, you're depending on the talents and the skills of your team, right? And so you hire people and you want to like do your best to support them and everything, but each person has to consciously choose how much of themselves they're going to share with your business, you know, and in turn with your clients. And so you can't force anybody to share their passion or creativity or trust, you know, like any of that. Like you have to consciously choose as a person, like I'm gonna share, I'm gonna go all in with this organization. And so, you know, my job as a leader is to keep my word, you know, support people, respect them, get out of the way and help them do great work. And so I've been really fortunate to have great people and to build that culture of trust with the team. And we've been through some hard times like any agency has, you know. In the early days, there was times of, you know, just going paycheck to paycheck, right? And like not sure I can make the next round of payments. So I sat the team down in 1 year and I just said, like, we're out of money. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, but I know that I don't want to keep living like this, you know, like this isn't fair to you. It's not fair to me. Like, I can't run a business that way. We need to do something different. And I did this at a retreat. I didn't know if everybody would just up and leave. But I knew I just had to, like, I had to put it out there. And so we we taught accounting classes. Like, we handed out Lullabot's income statement, our balance sheet, our P&L. Karen Stevenson, if you don't know her, she is another godsend of the Drupal community, wrote date module, calendar module, probably got involved in the early days with the content construction kit that later became Fields in Core. Yeah. Turns out she was also a CPA, certified accountant before joining the Drupal community. So her and Seth Brown led our accounting classes, and we figured stuff out. And at that retreat, we decided as a company that we needed a cash reserve. And we came up with a plan on how to do it, how to cut costs, how to work together to make that happen. And I saw the power of that. They didn't run for the door. They hunkered down. And I said, this is amazing. And that was called, what was it called? Open books management, right? Is the philosophy behind that. And I just said, what more can we do? Like, how can I just like take this and amplify it? That's like, well, give people a stake in the outcome, And so we did that in the early days with stock options. That's as close as I could get, but it didn't feel like the same thing. And so, for the next 9 years, we kept sharing more and more about how the business works, trying to cultivate and nurture ownership thinking. And until we reached a point where like, I could kind of take it as far as I could go. Like, I was quickly starting to get out of my domain of expertise, because employee ownership, the ESOP model, the employee stock ownership plan, is actually a formal retirement vehicle with all these stipulations and regulations that was created in like the 1970s. And we asked for help to get us to the finish line. And we did an analysis, and it turned out we could do it. And doing it sooner was better than doing it later. And so we pulled the trigger on it, and like, I couldn't be happier. It's everything that I've wanted for the team. And it's been 4 weeks since we've done it, but I can see the transformation of people. Like, I'm talking a lot less, the leadership team is talking a lot less, and the rest of the team is talking a lot more, and in a very owned voice. And it's incredible. So so I stepped down. And part of that was to facilitate the ESOP, because by me stepping down meant more people could step up, right?
Okay.
It created a succession, a pathway to happen. And I'm really excited now about bringing other things into Lullabot. So the agency is strong and doing well, and I'm thankful for that. But I'm really interested in like, how can I bring in other stuff, and I think employee ownership's just a great story to tell. I think things like Tugboat, and all of that like can help in big in that. So that's what I'm thinking about.
So expanding on that, as we get ready to close the show out here, we're talking about the future. What does the future of Tugboat look like? Do you guys have any new features or product offerings that are on the horizon?
Yeah, thanks, John. A couple things about that. So we have some new things. We are looking at better ways to support agencies. Agencies want a more consolidated way to see all of their projects month by month, and sort of that. So we're trying to think about what's the best way to create a dashboard to support organizations from that perspective. And the other thing that we're like in sort of the distant future is continuing to add tests that can run in the background on behalf of people. And the next viable candidate that we're looking at will be bringing security tests in to the feature branch workflow, quick security scans, again, trying to empower organizations to run those reports. And the last thing I want to say real quick, just so I said it, is that like Lullabot is hiring right now. And so if not today, soon, you'll see lots of jobs being posted. So encourage you all our listeners to take a look if they're looking.
Great way to become an employee owner, right?
That's right.
So we started the podcast off with some hard-hitting questions. So I think we'll end the same way. Can you tell us, you said that it started out as a pull request builder. How did the name Tugboat come about?
Corny. It was, I don't even remember how it came about. We were just looking at names, and I think it was just like the pull request, like pulling something, like tugboat pulls, like, all right, we're calling it Tugboat. Like that's what it is. And we soon learned that every now and then we would mispronounce it and call it Tugboat. Like every now and then we get the G and the B switched around.
That's better, I think.
And
Tugboat.
Tugboat. So we leaned into it. Jared Bittner was living on a farm, or had a neighbor that was on a farm, and there was literal goats in tubs. So he took pictures of the goats in tubs. And so anytime you hit a 404 error on the Tugboat website, you get a goat. Or if you get an error from the command line, you get an ASCII picture, an ASCII art of a goat in a tub. But there's a whole thing. William Archibald Spooner was a monk that was known, like in the 19th century, for flipping consonants around. And so when you do that, when you say tugboat, tub, goat, it's called a Spoonerism. Thanks, Wikipedia.
And what's
That's
interesting is I feel like I see goat yoga in a future Tugboat retreat or outing. I'm just putting that out there. Pictures.
These hard-hitting questions really pay off. It's amazing.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal. You can also contact us via the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. And last but not least, you can email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. If you're interested in show updates, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Hey, for the past 7 or 8 years, the hosts have paid for the expenses to produce the show. That is not the same anymore. We have sponsors that cover the costs. We're not making money here. We're just covering the costs for the production of the show every week. And we have sponsors that do that. We love them and we appreciate them. If you want to learn more about sponsoring Talking Drupal, you can go to talkingdrupal.com and click on the sponsor button.
Thank you for joining us, Matt. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you for your career-long support of Drupal and many things open source. Is there anything that we missed that you'd like to cover?
No, this is great. Thank you so much. I've had a lot of fun, and you all keep doing your contributions too. That's how we make a community, okay?
We'll do.
You got
and if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way, Matt?
Go to our website, tugboat.qa. Find our Slack community there, which is a great way to join in and get involved. It's at the very, very bottom where it says join our Slack community. But you can reach out to us through there.
Just out of curiosity, Matt, does Matt at tubgoat.com or tubgoat.qa work?
See what I mean?
Does that work? Because I feel like that could be a thing.
And,
yeah.
And Brian, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yep. Bry Comedy on Twitter, brianperry.dev on the web, and Brian at tubgoat.com.
Everybody's getting Tugboat emails.
And John, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and you can find out about you can talk to me in person at Drupal Providence this week, and you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
And Stephen, where can our listeners get in touch with you?
It's always stephencross.com. You can also look up Linux for Everyone publication. I'm doing some writings there recently. Check those out.
And listeners can get in touch with me at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.